Let's go ahead and get started. Questions. Let's do questions again. Is there anything you guys want to know that I haven't talked about or haven't implied that I will eventually talk about?
I saw on a previous syllabus.
Yep.
Thank you. Things about Sanderson's rules of combat scenes.
Yeah. Good thing to bring up.
Are we going to be going over those?
I wasn't planning to, but it's a good thing to talk about.
Okay.
So, fight scenes. Let's talk a little bit briefly. That's good, because then we'll do something more more writerly today before we get into the agent stuff. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about agents and about publishing and things like that, which is always, hi Jane, a little bit odd to talk about in the class, because really what you need to be doing is writing really well. Nothing else really matters that much for the vast majority of you. However, you're not going to get this anywhere else, okay? And that's why I spend a couple of weeks on it. Thank you. And that's why, we will talk about it a lot, and I bring the contracts and things like that, because this is the stuff that's really hard to get information about. But I want to get across to you. Writing really well is king, all right? That's what you really need to be focusing your attention on. And if you learn to write really well, you'll figure out on your own eventually what to do with that good writing. But I remember when I took this class, I kind of figured out some of the things I needed to do to become a good writer. I knew that I needed to practice, but the publishing stuff was just something I'd never had anyone sit me down and talk to me about. So that's why we'll spend time on it. But I do like the fact that, I do like when I can to emphasize that. And you give me an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the writing. So we'll do that, and then we'll get into agents and all that stuff that we're gonna be talking about, the sort of nitty-gritty and whatnot. Fight scenes. Fight scenes are hard. The reason that fight scenes are hard is we have been raised to view fight scenes in a certain way because of the media that we consume, the films, the television shows and whatnot. And the problem there is that an action sequence in a film can be so visually appealing that alone holds our interest. Has anyone seen a Jackie Chan film with an extended fight sequence? Right? Even the classic Hong Kong ones, they'll go for 20 minutes and you're there the whole time. If you tried to do that same thing in a book, it would get very boring very quickly. And so a lot of people that write fight scenes, newer authors that write fight scenes, tend to write them exactly like they've seen them in films, and the scenes are mind-numbingly boring. All right? And so I want to get that across to you. You can't just do what a film does. Instead, you are a writer, and you can do things that a film can't do. What can you do as a writer that a film can't do?
Get in the head.
Okay, get in the head.
You can put a pause in the action to explain something.
Okay, you can. You may not want to, but you can. It is always your option that you have more control over the pacing. Pacing control. All right, what else can you do?
World building.
Okay. Well, what do you mean? They can do world building in a film.
Well, I mean, show. Well, yeah, it's true. Show off the magic system.
Yep.
Whatever.
But they can do that just as well.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
Bring in other senses besides visual.
Okay, other senses. Good. Okay. That's getting to the core of it, though. We can go ahead.
You can choose exactly what the reader sees and what they experience.
Okay, I would say you could do that in a film too. You could by the angle of your shot and things. But yeah.
You might be able to get away with more blood and violence because you don't need to worry about.
Yeah, there's no MPAA on it.
Okay. That's a good one to bring up.
Well, maybe he means in detail. You can get into greater detail.
Because I mean,
you can do that all in a film too. It just affects differently. And so you have greater control. I suppose you can say, and this might piggyback on what you say, you can choose in what detail to describe what is happening. And so that you can, descriptive power. For instance, you know, the amount of attention to detail you give to certain things and of a graphic nature can, you know, in a film, it is a little bit harder to fudge those things. You show it and it's brutal. You can gloss that over in the book if you want to and not have to go into the vivid detail. So I guess that is an advantage that you can do. Though, yeah, okay.
Just on the same note, you can also withhold certain types of information by the way you describe a scene.
Yeah.
Whereas in a movie, when you show a scene, you kind of have to show everything that's right there. Whereas
Okay.
in a book, you can kind of withhold things.
Okay, good. We're gonna stop with this right here. We can go on forever on this, but I wanna point out this one is probably the big one, specifically with thoughts and emotions. Now we have to be careful to be, you know, following our rules of show versus tell. But at the end of the day, if we want to say that someone is angry, we can say that they're angry. You can use that shortcut. And you can give their thoughts, you can give their emotions, you can follow their lines of reasoning. And so a good fight sequence in a book, there's a few things you want to do. You are at a disadvantage because it is not a visual medium, but an imaginative medium, which means that your blocking really needs some attention in your fight scenes. Blocking is a stage term to describe where people are in relation to one another. And usually blocking is not super important. It's of moderate importance in a book. If you have some people, you know, in a sitting room having a conversation over tea, knowing who's sitting right next to whom is probably not essential for that scene, depending on, you know, things like, you know, who's handing what to what. You know, they're all at the table, they're having conversations. That's probably, you don't need it. But in a blocking, knowing where this character's standing in relation to this character in a fight scene becomes much more important. And so a lot of the problems with writing a fight scene is that people either skimp on the blocking, or they think that because they need to make sure their blocking is solid, they then go into a blow by blow. A blow by blow is generally going to not work as well in a book as it does in a film. This is the Jackie Chan principle, right? Watching him pull off cool flips and kicks is awesome on film for an extended period of time. It gets really repetitive and boring in a book. That's not to say you can't do it, and a lot of action stories will do it. The more you move toward, you know, an action-style story, the more you will see this. If you read Bob Salvatore's books, he will have a lot more blow by blow than you will find in a Jane Austen book. Okay? But what you've got to remember is this, by its nature, is not as effective in the books as it is in the film. So when you do this, you want to generally be active and brief in most instances. Make sure we know where people are. Try to keep your fight scene shorter than you probably think you need it to be from what films you've seen, and try to be very clear. This comes to the blocking. Once you have that, that's when you start to add what we can do in a book, which is this stuff. This is what makes an action sequence really work. Now, don't do this until you're sure that you have this down, that you're clear. That's probably, I would say this is more important, but without this, this isn't going to work, if that makes any sort of sense at all. So, this is the character making connections. The character feeling in peril. The character feeling fear, or thrill, or triumph. In other words, you are now using your fight scene to get across characterization and to check off little bullet points on your list from your plot. We're going to this fight sequence. What needs to happen? Well, this guy needs to beat this guy. Okay, great. What other 5 things can I put into that fight sequence that show character, that show off the setting, that are interesting and imaginative? Well, how can I show the character making connections, meaning show them being clever, show the character saying, okay, he's rotating on his left foot, that means he is going to come in with a feint, and if I deck him like this, boom, it'll work, and then it does. Set up a little mini try-fail cycle or try cycle where he's the character sees something and then pulls off the sequence. The idea being here, you want to highlight some of these situations. You want to do less boom, he swung his sword, and then he swung his sword again, and then he kicked, and then he punched, and then he swung his sword again. And instead, have your character be thinking, okay, I need to build up to this one thrust that is going to win, because if I don't, this person has more endurance than me, and they're going to beat me. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to put everything into this thrust and see if I win. And you can see how you are building in a scene like that. Instead of boring, boom, 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 you're building a rising action to a climax for that fight sequence, or to that mini part of the fight sequence. And then it fails or succeeds, and then the character's like, oh no, now my brother is in trouble over there because I've got him down on the floor and they're kicking at him, and so suddenly I have more urgency. How can I get there? Well, I'm going to take a few blows doing it, and some things like this. Don't get bogged down in this. Remember the active and brevity. But when you add these flourishes, that's what makes a fight sequence in a book really come to life versus a fight scene in a film.
How do you balance, say, a main character that the reader knows isn't going to die? How do you balance that with still being suspenseful?
How do you know? If the reader knows they're not going to die, then you might be, either you're writing a type of, usually you're doing something wrong.
Okay.
Now, the idea is that the character doesn't know they're not going to die. And yes, when you pick up a book, you generally know the main character's not going to die, in the first third. Is that what you're talking about?
For example, I started reading The Wheel of Time. Book 10 had already come out. I started number 1.
Okay,
and so in the sword fights, it's like, okay, like I know.
Right. That is a good question. And hopefully when you're doing these things, that's why whether they win or lose is not, I'll get to you in a second, is not as important as all of this stuff, right? What if they win? What does it cost them?
Okay.
If you can make sure that your victories have a cost to them, even when the character wins, you're going to be setting up for the fact that there is tension to every fight, and you can't really think about the fact that people are going to read your book when the 10th book's out and know the characters on the cover.
That's not the perspective that I mean.
But if you can put this sort of stuff in so they're connected to the character and enjoying the character, then your fight sequence is going to be successful. And if you're really doing your job, you will get them to suspend their disbelief and believe that this character really could die right here.
Okay.
And it depends on what type of story you're writing. You may want to do certain things in your story if it's really important to you that the characters always be in peril and that the reader not know if they're going to live or die. You take a more George R. R. Martin tack toward it, or something like that, and start killing off main characters to say, guess what? I don't watch the show, but apparently the show The Walking Dead does this. You never know, which main character is going to be offed in the next episode, because it could be any of them. That creates a certain sort of tension. All right, question over here, or comment.
Well, actually, I don't have anything else to add, but you don't have to kill your characters. You can still do horrible things
Yes,
without them dying.
Right, yeah. The idea is that in a lot of fiction, there are things at stake that are greater than the character living or dying.
Or some kind of consequence that they have to live with.
So. All right, over here.
Does increasing the number of viewpoint characters do anything to increase that kind of suspense?
Yes, but it makes it a whole lot more complicated.
Well, yeah, no,
In your
I
fight
mean,
sequence.
Like in a fight sequence, but for.
But yes, if you're going to be killing off main characters, then you definitely want to have multiple viewpoints, would be my suggestion. Generally.
The story ends, there's no one else to it.
It can increase or decrease the suspense depending on how you use it. Yeah, would be my suggestion. Okay? So that's kind of a brief thing on fight sequences. Know that there are, I wouldn't say the majority, but there are a substantial number of readers who skip fight sequences and look at the end to see who's alive and who's dead. Anyone in this room do that? Yeah, a couple
You
of you.
mean just flip through the pages?
They will flip through the pages and skip the entire fight scene.
How dare you?
What's that?
How dare you?
It happens. They are allowed to read the stories in the way they want to consume them. You have to realize as a writer that this happens. And so a little rule of thumb that you can use is give a short recap of who's alive at the end of a fight sequence. just a line of, I can't believe that we lost him or something, you can, think of that if you want to. You don't have to. But do know that a statistically significant, but not by any means super large segment of the population, mostly women, skip the fight sequences. I have one in my writing group. Yeah.
If a book is really suspenseful, my wife will flip to the back page, read that first, and then
Yes.
go back to where she is and continue.
My brother's fiance does that. She always reads the last
She
page
just can't
first.
handle it.
She has to know who's alive, and then she can deal with it. So.